The scream that would have saved her life died in her throat, just like it had every day for the past 8 years. Lyra Blackwood pressed her lips together, swallowing the sound that threatened to escape as Alpha Marcus's meaty hand slammed against the kitchen wall beside her head. His breath reeked of stale beer and dominance as he leaned close, trapping her between his bulk and the cold stone. Just breathe. Don't speak. Don't even whimper. Such a pretty little thing, Marcus growled, his yellow eyes raking over her trembling form. Shame you can't tell me how much you want this. Lyra forced her face into the same blank expression she'd perfected since she was 16. Empty eyes. Slack jaw. The perfect picture of a damaged Omega who couldn't speak, couldn't think beyond basic tasks. It had kept her alive this long. Her wolf, Sarah, prowled restlessly beneath her skin. Let me out. Let me rip his throat open. No. Lyra's internal voice was steel wrapped in desperation. We've been through this. If anyone discovers what we really are, we're dead. The monthly pack gathering was always the worst. Visiting alphas from neighboring territories prowled through the Shadow Moon Pack's territory like wolves hunting sheep, and unmated Omegas were their favorite prey. Lyra had learned to make herself invisible during these events, head down, shoulders hunched, moving like a ghost through the kitchen where she spent her days preparing meals for wolves who saw her as less than human. Marcus's finger traced her cheek, and Lyra's stomach churned. She forced herself to remain perfectly still, even as every instinct screamed at her to fight, to run, to shift and show this pathetic excuse for an alpha what a real wolf looked like. But she couldn't. Because Lyra Blackwood wasn't just any Omega hiding her voice. She was hiding so much more. Marcus. Alpha Thorn's sharp bark cut through the kitchen. Leave the help alone. We have business to discuss. Marcus stepped back with obvious reluctance, his gaze promising he'd return. This isn't over, little mute. The moment he left, Lyra sagged against the wall, her carefully controlled facade cracking for just a moment. Her hands shook as she picked up the serving tray she'd dropped, grateful the heavy pewter hadn't shattered. In her peripheral vision, she caught Beta James watching her with narrowed eyes. He suspects something. James had always been too observant for her comfort. While the other pack members dismissed her as a broken Omega barely worth feeding, he watched her with the intensity of a predator who sensed hidden prey. She'd caught him studying her during pack meetings, his head tilted like he was trying to solve a puzzle. The visiting alphas want more wine, he said, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. Don't drop anything else, Lyra. We can't afford to look sloppy tonight. She nodded mutely and hurried to the wine cellar, her bare feet silent on the stone steps. Down here, surrounded by dusty bottles and shadows, she finally allowed herself a moment of weakness. Her shoulders sagged, and she pressed her forehead against the cool wall. 8 years. 8 years of this performance, and sometimes she wondered if the act was becoming real. Sometimes she forgot what her own voice sounded like. You're stronger than this, Sarah reminded her. Remember why we're hiding. How could she forget? The memories of that night when she was 16 were burned into her soul. The screams. The blood. The moment she realized that being a rare Alpha-Omega hybrid made her more than just a prize, it made her a weapon that every powerful pack would kill to control. So she'd made herself disappear. Injured her throat just enough to sell the story of trauma-induced muteness. Suppressed her wolf until her scent read as pure Omega. Learned to make herself invisible, unremarkable, broken. It had worked perfectly. Until tonight. Lyra selected 3 bottles of the pack's finest wine and climbed back upstairs, where the great hall buzzed with nervous energy. Something was different. The visiting alphas stood straighter, their voices lower, their eyes darting toward the main entrance like they were expecting something. Or someone. He's here, she heard Beta James murmur to Alpha Thorn. The scouts just reported his convoy passing the eastern border. Already? He wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow. When has Damon Nightshade ever followed anyone else's timeline? Lyra's blood turned to ice water. No. No, no, no. Damon Nightshade. The Alpha King. The most powerful werewolf in North America, maybe the world. The man who'd united 7 of the largest packs under his rule through a combination of strategic brilliance and absolutely ruthless force. He was legend and nightmare rolled into one, and he was coming here. Just a routine territory inspection, Alpha Thorn was saying, but his voice cracked slightly. Nothing to worry about. Lyra forced her feet to move, carrying the wine to the serving station where other Omegas waited with platters of food. She kept her head down and her breathing steady, even as panic clawed at her chest. Routine inspections were never routine when it came to the Alpha King. Daemon Nightshade didn't travel anywhere without cause, and his causes usually involved blood. The great hall fell silent so suddenly that Lyra's ears rang. Even the fire seemed to dim as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, measured, confident, carrying the weight of absolute authority. Don't look up. Whatever happens, don't look up. The massive oak doors swung open. Alpha Daemon Nightshade stepped into the hall like darkness given form. He was taller than she'd expected, his presence filling the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. His black hair was swept back from a face that belonged on ancient statues, all sharp angles and cruel beauty. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from every lung in the room. Silver. Not gray, not pale blue, but true silver that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Eyes that missed nothing, forgave nothing, and promised swift death to anyone foolish enough to challenge him. Don't look up. Don't look up. Don't. Those silver eyes swept across the room like searchlights, cataloging every face, every threat, every secret. They moved past the visiting alphas, past Beta James, past Alpha Thorn's nervous bow. And locked directly onto Lyra. The world stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Her heart forgot to beat. Her lungs forgot to draw breath. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear into the earth itself rather than face what was happening. The mate bond hit her like a physical blow, a golden chain that wrapped around her soul and yanked tight. It was impossible. It was terrifying. It was absolutely, completely real. Mate. The word echoed through her mind in Sarah's voice, filled with recognition and desperate longing. After years of suppression, her wolf surged forward, pressing against Lyra's mental barriers like a dam about to burst. Across the room, Daemon Nightshade's nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. His silver eyes narrowed, and for one heart-stopping moment, Lyra saw something flicker across his face that might have been surprise. Then his expression went cold as winter, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that she was looking at her death. Because the Alpha King was her fated mate. And when he discovered what she really was, what she'd been hiding, there would be nowhere in the world she could run. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. The Alpha King's silver eyes never left her face. Lyra forced herself to look away, to focus on the wine bottles in her trembling hands, but she could feel his gaze like a physical weight pressing against her skin. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to acknowledge him, to meet his stare, to step forward and claim what was hers by the ancient laws that bound their kind. Instead, she ducked her head lower and shuffled toward the serving station like the broken Omega she pretended to be. Welcome to Shadowmoon Pack, Your Majesty, Alpha Thorn's voice cracked slightly as he dropped to one knee. The rest of the pack followed suit in a wave of submission that rippled through the great hall. We are honored by your presence. Daemon's response was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stone floors. Rise. The single word carried such authority that even Lyra's wolf responded, Sarah lifting her head with interest despite 8 years of forced dormancy. Lyra bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood, using the pain to maintain focus. I trust my visit isn't inconvenient, Daemon continued, and there was something in his tone that made it clear this wasn't a request for reassurance. Of course not, Your Majesty. Though we weren't expecting you until. Plans change. Daemon's boots clicked against the stone as he moved deeper into the hall, and Lyra tracked his movement through her peripheral vision. I received concerning reports about rogue activities near your eastern borders. It seemed prudent to investigate personally. Liar. The thought appeared unbidden in Lyra's mind. There had been no unusual rogue activity in months. She would know. She often helped prepare the reports that Beta James delivered to the pack leadership. We appreciate your diligence, Alpha Thorn said quickly. Please, allow us to show you to the guest quarters. Our finest suite is prepared. Later. Damon's voice cut through the obsequious chatter like a blade. First, I require refreshment. That silver gaze swept the room again, and this time when it landed on Lyra, it stayed. You. Omega. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. She pointed at herself with a questioning expression, playing the part of the confused, simple-minded servant. Yes, you. There was something almost amused in his tone now. Bring wine. She nodded mutely and selected one of the bottles, moving with the careful, measured steps she'd perfected over the years. Keep the eyes downcast. Move with purpose but not too much confidence. Never, ever show intelligence. But as she approached the Alpha King, the mate bond pulled tighter, and she had to fight every cell in her body not to respond to his proximity. His scent hit her like a physical blow, pine and smoke and something darker, more primal. Power. Dominance. The kind of strength that could protect or destroy with equal ease. Mine, Sarah whispered, pressing against Lyra's mental barriers with renewed desperation. He's ours. Claim him. Let me out. No. But even as Lyra reinforced her mental walls, she could feel them cracking. 8 years of suppression had taken its toll, and the mate bond was like acid eating through her defenses. She reached Damon and carefully poured wine into his goblet, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. His hand was inches from hers on the table, and the urge to touch him was so strong it made her physically ache. Look at me. The command hit her like a whip crack, and before she could stop herself, her eyes snapped up to meet his. For a moment that stretched into eternity, she was caught in that silver gaze, drowning in recognition and something that might have been hunger. Then she remembered herself and quickly looked away, but not before she caught the slight narrowing of his eyes. Had he seen something in her expression? Some flicker of the intelligence she worked so hard to hide? Interesting, he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. Lyra finished pouring and stepped back, but Damon's voice stopped her retreat. Stay. It wasn't a request. Alpha Thorn shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to ask why the Alpha King was interested in a defective Omega, but not daring to question his guest. Your Majesty, Thorn began carefully, perhaps one of our other pack members could better serve. This one will do. Damon settled into the chair at the head of the long table, his movements fluid and controlled. I find silence restful. Over the next hour, as the pack's leadership made awkward conversation with their terrifying guest, Lyra became increasingly aware that she was being studied. Not just watched, dissected. Every gesture, every micro-expression, every tiny movement was being catalogued and analyzed by a mind that had survived centuries by reading people like open books. Damon began testing her. First, he knocked his goblet to the floor with what appeared to be an accidental gesture. Lyra moved to clean it before the wine could stain the stone, and she caught the slight tilt of his head as he observed her reaction time. Too fast. A truly damaged Omega would have been slower to respond, more confused by the sudden noise. Next, he spoke directly to her, his voice pitched just low enough that someone with impaired hearing might miss it. More wine, Omega. She heard him perfectly, of course, and reached for the bottle. Another mistake. Someone who relied on lip reading would have needed to see his face to understand the command. By the third test, a casual comment about the weather that he made while looking in the opposite direction, Lyra realized what was happening. The Alpha King suspected her deception. Terror and something dangerously close to admiration warred in her chest. He was brilliant, ruthless, and thorough. Everything the legends claimed and more. Under different circumstances, she might have been impressed by his tactical mind. Instead, she was calculating how quickly she could run. "I've decided to extend my stay," Damon announced suddenly, and the entire room went silent. "The rogue situation requires more thorough investigation." Alpha Thorne's face went pale. "Of course, Your Majesty." "How long?" "As long as necessary." Those silver eyes found Lyra again. "And I'll require personal service during my visit. This Omega will attend to my needs." The words hit the room like a bomb. Lyra's knees nearly gave out, and she had to grip the edge of the table to remain upright. Serve him personally? Be under his constant scrutiny? She'd be exposed within hours. "Your Majesty," Beta James spoke up, his voice carefully neutral, "perhaps I could assign someone more suitable." Lyra is mute, possibly deaf, and her understanding is limited. She might not be able to. She'll learn. There was finality in Damon's tone that brooked no argument. "I prefer my servants to be seen and not heard." The cruel irony of the statement wasn't lost on her. After what felt like an eternity, the gathering finally ended. The visiting alphas retreated to their quarters. Alpha Thorne excused himself to prepare reports, and the great hall slowly emptied until only pack members remained. Lyra was cleaning up the remnants of the meal when a familiar presence appeared at her elbow. "We need to talk." Thomas Blackwood, no relation, despite the shared surname, was the only person alive who knew her secret. They'd grown up together, and he'd been there the night her world had shattered. He'd helped her fake the throat injury, coached her through the early days of her deception, and kept her secret for 8 long years. Looking at him now, she could see the fear in his dark eyes. They made their way to the empty kitchen, where Thomas immediately began pacing. His beta instincts were on high alert, and his wolf was close to the surface. "This is bad, Lyra. This is really, really bad." She looked around to make sure they were alone, then allowed herself to speak for the first time in hours. Her voice came out as barely a whisper, rusty from disuse. "I know. Do you? Because I don't think you understand just how screwed we are." Thomas ran his hands through his brown hair, a gesture she remembered from their childhood when he was stressed. "The Alpha King doesn't just decide to stay somewhere on a whim. He's here for a reason, and that reason is you. You don't know that. Don't I?" Thomas stopped pacing and fixed her with a stare. He couldn't take his eyes off you. Every wolf in that room noticed it. And now some of them are talking. A chill ran down her spine. What kind of talking? The kind where they think gifting a broken Omega to the most powerful Alpha in the continent might earn them favor. His voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Marcus has been bragging about how he's going to prepare you for the Alpha King's pleasure. And Alpha Thorne is seriously considering it." Lyra's stomach lurched. "Thomas. It gets worse." He moved closer, his voice barely audible now. "I overheard Beta James talking to Alpha Thorne after the gathering. He thinks there's something off about you. He's been watching you for months, and tonight confirmed his suspicions." The walls felt like they were closing in. 8 years of careful planning, of meticulous performance, and it was all unraveling in a single night. "What do I do?" "Run." The word was immediate, desperate. "Tonight. Before dawn. I'll help you disappear." "I can't." The admission was torn from her throat like a physical wound. Thomas stared at her. "What do you mean, you can't?" How could she explain the mate bond? How could she tell him that every step away from Damon felt like dying, that her wolf was clawing at her insides, demanding she return to her mate? How could she admit that despite the danger, despite the terror, part of her wanted to be caught? "It's complicated. Lyra. I can't run, Thomas. Not from this." He studied her face, and she watched understanding dawn in his eyes. "Oh no. Oh, hell no. Please tell me you're not. He's my mate." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Thomas sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, his face in his hands. "We're dead. We are so dead. Maybe not. Maybe I can." "Can what?" Keep lying to the most dangerous predator on the continent? Keep pretending to be something you're not while the mate bond eats you alive? He looked up at her, and she saw 8 years of friendship and protection in his eyes. He's going to find out, Lyra. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when he does, I'll handle it. How? By telling him you've been lying to his face since the moment you met? By explaining that you're not just any Omega, but a hybrid who could challenge his authority? By hoping he'll overlook the fact that you've made him look like a fool in front of his subordinates? Each word hit her like a physical blow because she knew he was right. There was no scenario where this ended well for her. I have to try. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with resignation. Then I'll help you. Just like always. Thomas, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He stood, and for a moment she saw the strong beta he'd become, the man who'd protected her secret at great personal cost. You're my family, Lyra. The only family that matters. If you're determined to walk into this fire, then I'm going with you. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside the kitchen. They froze, and Thomas quickly moved to the opposite side of the room, beginning to stack dishes as if they'd been working in companionable silence. Beta James appeared in the doorway, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. Lyra. You're needed in the guest quarters. The Alpha King requires attention. Her blood turned to ice, but she nodded mutely and followed James through the corridors of the pack house. With each step, the mate bond pulled tighter, and she had to fight the urge to run toward Damon rather than away from him. James stopped outside an ornate door and knocked. Your Majesty, the Omega is here. Enter. The command was muffled by the heavy wood, but it still sent a shiver through her body. James opened the door and gestured for her to go inside. The guest suite was larger than her entire living space, dominated by a massive 4-poster bed and a fireplace that cast dancing shadows across the walls. Damon stood with his back to her, looking out the window at the moonlit forest beyond. Leave us, he said without turning around. James hesitated. Your Majesty, perhaps I should. Leave. Us. This time the command carried the full weight of an Alpha's authority, and James had no choice but to retreat, closing the door behind him with an ominous click. Lyra stood frozen just inside the doorway, every instinct screaming at her to run while simultaneously begging her to move closer to her mate. The internal war was tearing her apart. Do you know what I find most interesting about liars? Damon asked conversationally, still facing the window. Her heart stopped. They always give themselves away. A gesture, a glance, a moment of forgetting their own performance. He turned then, and those silver eyes pinned her in place like a butterfly on a board. You've been very careful, little Omega. Very thorough. But not quite careful enough. Lyra opened her mouth, then closed it, playing her part even as terror clawed at her throat. Damon moved toward her with predatory grace. For instance, when I accidentally dropped my goblet tonight, you moved to clean it before the wine hit the floor. Impressive reflexes for someone who supposedly can't hear. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that intoxicating scent that made her wolf pace restlessly. And when I gave you that command without looking at you, the one about the wine, you responded immediately. No confusion, no need to ask for clarification through gestures. Almost as if you heard every word. Breathe. Just breathe. Don't give him anything else. But my personal favorite, he continued, circling her now like a wolf stalking prey, was the way you looked at me during the gathering. Not the vacant stare of a simple-minded Omega, but the calculating gaze of someone who was analyzing every word, every gesture, every potential threat. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could see flecks of blue in those impossible silver eyes. So here's what's going to happen, little liar. You're going to tell me who you really are, what you're hiding, and why you've chosen to play this dangerous game. Or I'm going to find out on my own, and trust me, you won't enjoy my methods of interrogation. The threat hung between them like a blade, and Lyra knew she was trapped. But before she could formulate any kind of response, a howl split the night air outside the window. Not the normal call of a pack member on patrol, but something wild and desperate. A warning. Damon's head snapped toward the sound, his entire body going rigid. Rogues. Another howl answered the first, then another, until the night was filled with the cacophony of an attack. Damon moved to the window, and Lyra could see the dark shapes racing through the forest beyond the pack grounds. "They're moving in coordinated formation," he said, and there was something like impressed surprise in his voice. "This isn't a random attack. Someone's leading them." The pack house erupted into motion around them. Doors slammed, voices shouted orders, and the thunder of running feet echoed through the corridors as pack members mobilized to defend their territory. "Stay here," Damon commanded, already moving toward the door. "Don't move, don't speak, don't do anything that might complicate this situation further." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone in the suddenly quiet room. Through the window, she could see the battle beginning to take shape, pack wolves streaming out to meet the rogue threat while others took defensive positions around the vulnerable areas of their territory. "Let me out." Sarah's voice was stronger now, fed by the violence and chaos outside. "Our mate is in danger. Let me protect him." "No." But even as Lyra reinforced her mental barriers, she could feel them straining. The mate bond was pulling at her, demanding she go to Damon, demanding she fight beside him. He could die. The thought hit her like a physical blow. Images flashed through her mind, Damon falling beneath a rogue's claws, his silver eyes going dim, the mate bond snapping like a severed rope. No. She pressed her face to the window, searching the darkness for any sign of him. There, a flash of movement near the eastern border where the attack was heaviest. She could see him now, a blur of deadly grace as he tore through the rogue forces with surgical precision. But there were so many of them. Too many. As she watched, 3 rogues broke away from the main fight and circled behind Damon's position. He was focused on the enemies in front of him, unaware of the trap being set. "Let me out. Now." This time, Lyra didn't fight her wolf's demand. She couldn't. Not when her mate was about to die. The shift hit her like lightning, 8 years of suppression exploding outward in a cascade of power that shattered her carefully constructed mental barriers. Her human form dissolved, replaced by a wolf that was larger than it should be, stronger than any Omega had a right to be. She didn't remember breaking through the window. Didn't remember the fall to the ground below or the sprint across the pack grounds. All she knew was that her mate was in danger, and nothing would stop her from reaching him. The first rogue died before it knew she was there, her jaws closing around its throat with crushing force. The second turned just in time to see death coming, its eyes widening in shock at the size of the wolf bearing down on it. But it was the third rogue, the one with its claws poised to strike Damon from behind, that heard her voice. "Move." The telepathic command cracked through the night like thunder, reaching every wolf within miles. Damon spun, his silver eyes widening as he saw the rogue behind him and the massive wolf, her, tearing toward them both. She hit the third rogue mid-leap, sending them both tumbling across the forest floor in a snarling tangle of fur and fangs. It was larger than her, older, more experienced in battle. But it wasn't protecting its mate. The fight was brutal and brief. When it was over, the rogue lay motionless beneath her, its throat torn out. "Rally to the eastern border." Her voice rang out again, coordinating the pack's defense with tactical precision that no Omega should possess. "Flank them from the north. Cut off their retreat." Around her, she could feel the pack responding to her commands, moving with renewed purpose and coordination. The battle tide turned, and within minutes the surviving rogues were fleeing back into the wilderness. Only then did she realize what she'd done. The forest had gone silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and the low whines of wounded wolves. Every member of the Shadow Moon pack was staring at her, the mute Omega who had just spoken telepathically to coordinate their entire defense. But it was Damon's gaze that held her captive. He stood 20 feet away, his human form restored, blood streaking his face and chest. Those silver eyes were wide with shock, with recognition, with something that might have been awe. Mate. The word whispered through the pack bond, and she realized with growing horror that everyone had heard it. Her wolf had claimed him publicly, in front of witnesses, in a voice that carried the unmistakable authority of an alpha. The secret she'd guarded for 8 years was destroyed. And from the expression on Damon's face, she was about to discover whether her mate would protect her or destroy her. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. The walk back to the pack house felt like a death march. Lyra had shifted back to human form behind a cluster of trees, her naked body trembling from more than just the cold mountain air. Someone had brought her clothes. She thought it might have been Thomas, though her mind was too fractured to be certain. All she could focus on was the weight of dozens of stairs boring into her back as she walked, and the terrifying silence of the man beside her. Damon hadn't spoken a word since the battle ended. He'd simply jerked his head toward the pack house and started walking, leaving her no choice but to follow. His face was a mask of controlled fury that made her wolf whimper and retreat to the deepest corners of her mind. The pack members they passed fell silent, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they took in the sight of their mute Omega walking beside the Alpha King like an equal. Some looked confused. Others looked betrayed. A few looked calculating, and those were the ones that made her skin crawl. Inside, Damon said when they reached the guest quarters. It was the first word he'd spoken to her since the battle, and it carried enough command to make her knees shake. She entered the room ahead of him, hyper-aware of his presence at her back. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid in the sudden silence. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Lyra stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, while Damon remained by the door. She could feel his gaze on her like a physical weight, dissecting her, cataloging every micro-expression. 8 years, he said finally, and his voice was deadly quiet. 8 years of lies. She flinched but didn't respond. What could she say? There was no defense for what she'd done, no excuse he would accept. Do you have any idea? He stopped, and she heard him take a deep, controlled breath. When he spoke again, his voice was ice. Do you have any fucking idea what you've done? The profanity hit her like a slap. In all the legends, all the stories, she'd never heard of the Alpha King losing his composure. But his control was fracturing, and she could see the predator beneath the civilized mask. Answer me. The command cracked through the air with alpha authority, and her body responded before her mind could catch up. Yes. The single word hung between them like a confession. Damon moved then, crossing the room in 3 quick strides until he was standing directly in front of her. This close, she could see the gold flecks in his silver eyes, could smell the lingering scent of battle on his skin. Yes, what? Yes, I know what I've done. Her voice was barely a whisper, rusty from years of disuse, but each word was clear. I've lied to you. To everyone. For 8 years. 8 years, he repeated, and there was something almost wondering in his tone. 8 years of playing mute while listening to every conversation, every secret, every plan. 8 years of making fools of everyone around you. She wanted to deny it, to explain that it hadn't been like that, but the words stuck in her throat. Because in a way, he was right. She had listened. She had learned things she shouldn't have known. She had used her perceived disability as both shield and weapon. Why? The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. How could she explain 8 years of terror, of hiding, of slowly losing herself in the role she'd created? How could she make him understand that the alternative had been death, or worse? I was 16, she began, then stopped. Started again. There was an alpha. From the Northern Territories. He heard rumors about my bloodline, about what I might be. Damon's eyes narrowed. What you might be? She pulled the collar of her shirt aside, revealing the long, jagged scars that ran across her throat and down to her collarbone. Damon's entire body went rigid, and she heard his sharp intake of breath. He tried to claim me, she continued, her voice steady despite the memories clawing at her mind. Said I belonged to him by right of strength. When I fought back, when my wolf tried to protect me. She touched the scars with shaking fingers. He said if I wouldn't submit willingly, he'd make sure I could never call for help. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. When she looked up, Daemon's eyes were no longer silver, they were the deep, molten gold of his wolf, and the air around him practically vibrated with barely contained violence. He's dead. It wasn't a question. Thomas killed him. The admission felt like a betrayal, even now. My throat was so damaged I couldn't speak for months. When it healed enough to try, I realized, everyone assumed I was mute. Broken. And broken Omegas don't get claimed. So you let them think it. I encouraged it. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. I made myself small, unremarkable, damaged. I learned to disappear. Daemon was quiet for a long time, his gaze fixed on the scars that marked her throat. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled again, but she could hear the fury simmering beneath the surface. The Alpha who hurt you. What was his name? It doesn't matter. His name. The command was absolute, and she found herself answering before she could think better of it. Garrett Voss. From the Blood Moon Pack. Something flickered across Daemon's face, recognition, maybe, or satisfaction. Good. That saves me the trouble of tracking him down. Before she could process what that meant, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Daemon's head snapped toward the door, his expression shifting from fury to cold calculation. Enter. Alpha Thorne stepped into the room, his face pale and drawn. Behind him came Beta James, and bringing up the rear was Alpha Marcus, whose expression was a mixture of humiliation and rage that made Lyra's skin crawl. Your Majesty, Thorne began carefully, we need to discuss the situation. Situation? Daemon's voice was deceptively mild. The Omega, Marcus snarled, his yellow eyes fixed on Lyra with undisguised hatred. She's made fools of us all. Deceived the entire pack hierarchy. She needs to be punished. Daemon turned slightly, positioning himself between Marcus and Lyra in a move so subtle she almost missed it. Punished for what, exactly? For lying. Marcus's voice rose, spittle flying from his lips. For 8 years of deception. For making us all look like idiots in front of, he gestured wildly at Daemon. She's unworthy. Untrustworthy. A lying Omega has no place in any pack, let alone as a mate to the Alpha King. The last words were delivered with such venom that Lyra actually stepped backward. But Daemon didn't move. If anything, he seemed to grow larger, more imposing, until the air in the room felt thick and oppressive. Mate? His voice was silk over steel. Did I claim her? Marcus faltered. Well, no, but... Did I announce a mating bond? The battle, everyone heard. Everyone heard her wolf speak. They heard her coordinate our defense. They heard her save lives. Each word was delivered with surgical precision. What they didn't hear was me accepting or rejecting any bond. Lyra's heart clenched. He was giving himself an out, a way to reject her publicly without losing face. She should have been grateful, it would make her exile easier to bear. Instead, she felt like she was dying. Nevertheless, Beta James interjected smoothly, the pack needs to know what's to be done about her deception. There are questions about her loyalty. Her trustworthiness. Are there? Daemon's attention shifted to the Beta, and James actually took a step backward. And who, exactly, is questioning the loyalty of a wolf who just risked her life to save her packmates? She lied to us for 8 years, Marcus insisted, his voice climbing toward hysteria. 8 years. How do we know she hasn't been spying? Selling our secrets? She could be working for anyone. Enough. The single word cut through Marcus's rant like a blade, and the visiting Alpha's mouth snapped shut. Daemon looked at each man in turn, his silver eyes promising swift retribution to anyone foolish enough to continue the attack on Lyra. "You're concerned about her loyalty," he said finally. "About her trustworthiness. Tell me, Alpha Marcus, where were you during the battle tonight?" Marcus's face went pale. "I was organizing the defense of the pack house." "You were cowering in the wine cellar," Damon corrected, and Marcus's mouth fell open in shock. "Along with 2 other visiting alphas who fled the moment the first howl sounded." "That's not." "While you were hiding," Damon continued relentlessly, "this supposedly untrustworthy Omega was saving my life. And yours." The rogue's primary target was the pack house, specifically, the visiting dignitaries. "If she hadn't coordinated our defense, if she hadn't turned the tide of that battle, you'd all be dead." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked like he'd been gutted, his face cycling through shades of red and white. Alpha Thorn was staring at the floor, while Beta James seemed to be reconsidering everything he thought he knew about pack politics. "Now," Damon said, his tone deceptively casual, "unless any of you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, beyond the crime of surviving, I suggest you focus your attention on more pressing matters. Like why the rogues knew exactly when and where to attack." Another knock interrupted the tense silence. This time, it was Pack Alpha Johnson who entered, his weathered face grave and his dark eyes immediately seeking out Lyra. "Your Majesty," he said, inclining his head respectfully. "I apologize for the interruption, but there are things that need to be said." Johnson was older than the others, his hair silver with age and his face lined with the weight of leadership. He'd always been kind to Lyra, treating her with a gentle patience that made her think of the father she'd barely remembered. "Speak," Damon said. Johnson's gaze moved to Marcus, then to James, then back to Damon. "Perhaps this conversation would be better held in private." "These men have already made their concerns known," Damon replied. "If you have information relevant to those concerns, they should hear it." Johnson nodded slowly, then looked directly at Lyra. His expression was sad, almost apologetic. "I've known Lyra's secret since the night she arrived at our pack," he said quietly. "I knew she wasn't truly mute. I knew she was hiding something. And I protected her because I knew what would happen if the truth came out." Marcus made a sound of outrage, but Johnson held up a hand. "Her parents were murdered," he continued, his voice heavy with old grief. "Slaughtered by a coalition of alphas who wanted to claim the Silver Wolf bloodline for themselves. Lyra is the last of her kind, the last heir to a genetic legacy that most wolves thought was extinct." "Silver Wolf?" Beta James leaned forward, his eyes sharp with interest. "A bloodline that surfaces once every few generations," Johnson explained. "Wolves born with the ability to amplify an alpha's power exponentially. In the old days, they were revered, protected, cherished as gifts from the moon goddess herself. But as packs grew larger and alphas grew hungrier for power." He didn't need to finish. They all understood what had happened to a bloodline that could make or break kingdoms. "They became targets," Damon said, and there was something in his voice that made Lyra look at him sharply. "More than targets," Johnson confirmed. "They became weapons. Objects to be claimed, controlled, used." Lyra's parents tried to hide, to live quietly, but someone always found them. Someone always wanted to use their daughter's gift for their own ends. "And now they've found her again," Lyra said quietly, the pieces clicking together in her mind. "The rogue attacks weren't random." Johnson nodded grimly. "The coalition is still out there. Still hunting. They've been searching for 18 years, following every rumor, every whisper. And somehow, they've found you." "How?" Damon's voice was deadly quiet. Johnson's gaze shifted to Marcus, whose face had gone completely white. "Someone's been feeding them information. Someone who knows the pack's routines, our defenses, our weaknesses." The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. "That's ridiculous," Beta James said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. "Marcus has been a loyal ally for years." "Have I?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper, and when he looked up, his eyes held the desperate gleam of a cornered animal. Have I really, James? When your precious Alpha King has shown me nothing but contempt? When he flaunts his power while the rest of us scrape for scraps? The confession hit the room like a physical blow. Even Lyra, who had suspected treachery, felt her stomach drop at the naked hatred in Marcus's voice. You sold out both packs, Daemon said, and his tone was conversational, almost curious. For what? Money? Power? A promise of territory? For respect. Marcus snarled, his composure finally shattering completely. For the chance to be something more than your lapdog. They offered me a real pack, real power, and all I had to do was deliver one broken little Omega. He turned to Lyra, his eyes burning with fury and humiliation. But you're not broken, are you? You're the silver wolf they've been hunting. The key to power beyond imagination. And you've been hiding right under our noses, playing your pathetic little games while alphas died searching for you. The admission was followed by chaos. Beta James lunged forward, his wolf rising to the surface as he realized the scope of Marcus's betrayal. Alpha Thorn was shouting questions, his voice rising above the din. Johnson moved to shield Lyra, his protective instincts overriding everything else. But it was Daemon who cut through the noise with a single, devastating command. Enough. The word cracked through the air like a whip, and every wolf in the room froze. The Alpha King stepped forward, and Marcus actually whimpered as those silver eyes fixed on him with predatory focus. You betrayed your allies, Daemon said quietly. You sold information to rogues. You planned to deliver an innocent woman to monsters who would use her until she broke, then discard her corpse. Marcus tried to speak, but only a strangled sound emerged from his throat. And worst of all, Daemon continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout, you put my mate in danger. The possessive claim hit Lyra like a physical blow. Her mate. He'd called her his mate, publicly, in front of witnesses. Not a potential mate or a possible bond, but his mate. Marcus made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. She's not your mate. She's a liar, a deceiver. He never finished the sentence. Daemon moved faster than human eyes could follow, his hand closing around Marcus's throat with crushing force. You're right, he said, his voice eerily calm as Marcus clawed at his grip. She is a liar. She's also brave, intelligent, and strong enough to sacrifice 8 years of her life to survive. She's the wolf who saved your miserable life tonight, and she's mine. Marcus's face was turning purple, his struggles growing weaker. Any last words? Daemon. Johnson's voice was quiet but firm. Not here. Not like this. For a moment, Lyra thought Daemon would ignore the older Alpha's plea. His grip tightened, and Marcus's eyes began to roll back. Then, with visible effort, he released his hold. Marcus collapsed to the floor, gasping and retching. You have until dawn to leave our territory, Daemon said, not even looking down at the broken Alpha. If I see you again, if I even hear your name spoken in my presence, I will finish what I started here. And it will not be quick. Marcus scrambled toward the door, his dignity abandoned in his desperate need to escape. But at the threshold, he turned back, his face twisted with malice. You think you've won? He gasped. You think claiming her will end this? The coalition knows where she is now. They're coming, and they'll tear through both your packs to get to her. Enjoy your mate while you can, Alpha King. She's already dead. Then he was gone, leaving behind only the echo of his words and the promise of war. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Dawn brought no peace to Shadowmoon Pack. Lyra stood at the window of Daemon's quarters, watching the organized chaos in the courtyard below as pack members prepared for war. The scent of fear hung thick in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of weapons being sharpened and the acrid smoke of emergency signal fires. Marcus's parting words echoed in her mind, They're coming, and they'll tear through both your packs to get to her. She pressed her palm against the glass, fighting the urge to run. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to flee, to lead the danger away from the people who had sheltered her for 8 years. But Damon's arm around her waist anchored her in place, his warmth a constant reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. The perimeter scouts report movement on 3 fronts, Damon said, his voice grim as he read the latest reports. At least 40 wolves, possibly more. They're coordinating their approach to hit us simultaneously. How long do we have? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Hours. Maybe less. He set the papers aside and turned her to face him, his silver eyes intense with purpose. Lyra, we need to get you out of here. My fortress is. No. The word escaped before she could stop it, carrying a weight of command that made both of them freeze. Damon's eyes narrowed slightly. That wasn't a request. And that wasn't a normal refusal, she whispered, horror creeping through her voice. Around them, she could hear movement stopping, conversations faltering, as if the entire pack house had turned to listen to her words. The silver wolf powers, she realized. They're getting stronger. Lyra. Damon's voice was carefully controlled. What just happened? Before she could answer, a knock echoed through the door. Your Majesty. Alpha Johnson requests an immediate audience. Damon called for them to enter, and Johnson appeared with Thomas close behind. Her childhood friend looked haggard, his beta instincts clearly on high alert, but when his eyes met hers, she saw relief flood his features. The enemy forces are larger than we initially thought, Johnson reported. Our scouts count at least 60 wolves, led by 3 alphas from the Northern Coalition. They're not just here to capture Lyra, they mean to destroy anyone who might know her true identity. All the more reason to get her to safety, Damon said firmly. I'm not leaving. This time, Lyra was ready for the command power that threaded through her voice, but it was stronger than before, more refined. She felt it pulse outward like a ripple, touching every wolf within hearing range. In the courtyard below, pack members stopped what they were doing and looked up at the window. She could feel their attention like a physical weight, their wolves responding to hers with an eagerness that terrified her. Lyra, Thomas said carefully, maybe you should. I'm not abandoning the people who protected me, she continued, and with each word the power grew stronger. I won't let innocent wolves die for my mistakes. It's not about your mistakes, Damon said, his own alpha authority rising to meet hers. The collision of their powers sent electricity crackling through the air. It's about keeping you alive. And what about Thomas? What about Johnson? What about every Omega and child in this pack who can't fight? Her voice climbed, and she felt her control slipping. What happens to them when 60 enemy wolves tear through our defenses looking for me? The answer hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all of them. Massacre. Complete and total destruction of everyone she'd ever cared about. Then we split our forces, Johnson said quietly. Some of us escort Lyra to safety while the rest. No. Damon's voice cut through the suggestion like a blade. We don't split up. We stay together, we fight together, or we die together. But even as he spoke, Lyra could see the conflict in his eyes. The Alpha King's tactical mind was already calculating odds, weighing options, searching for a solution that would keep her safe without sacrificing her pack family. The mate bond pulsed between them, and she felt his turmoil as if it were her own. The need to protect her ward with his understanding that she would never forgive him if he let others die in her place. There might be another way, she said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. If my powers are really that strong, if I can command other wolves. Absolutely not. Damon's response was immediate and fierce. You have no training, no control. Using that kind of power could kill you. It could save everyone. It could destroy you. He moved closer, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. Lyra, please. Let me protect you. Let me get you somewhere safe. The mate bond flared at his touch, and for a moment she was lost in the silver depths of his eyes. She wanted to say yes, wanted to let him sweep her away to his fortress where she could pretend the world wasn't burning down around them. But then she heard it, a child's cry from the courtyard below. One of the young ones, frightened by the preparations for battle, calling for his mother. "I can't," she whispered, and her heart broke a little at the pain that flashed across Daemon's face. "I'm sorry, but I can't run anymore." Before he could respond, urgent shouting erupted from outside. They all rushed to the window to see a scout racing across the courtyard, his clothes torn and bloodied. "They've taken the northern border," he called up to them. "Beta Thomas's patrol, they were ambushed." Lyra's blood turned to ice. "Thomas is right here." The scout's face went pale as he spotted Thomas in the window. "Not him, the other Thomas. Thomas Milliner. They have him, Your Majesty. The enemy sent this." He held up a piece of fabric stained with blood. Thomas Milliner's patrol jacket. Johnson cursed under his breath. "They're trying to draw us out." "It's working," Daemon said grimly. "Thomas knows our defensive positions, our patrol routes. If they torture him..." He didn't need to finish. They all understood the implications. "We have to save him," Lyra said, and once again her voice carried that terrifying command power. Around the pack house, she could feel wolves stopping what they were doing, turning toward her voice like flowers toward the sun. "It's a trap," Thomas warned, his beta instincts overriding his concern for his namesake. "Of course it's a trap." Daemon was already moving toward his weapons. "But we can't leave him to die. And we can't let them break him." "Then we go together," Lyra said. "No." This time, Daemon's alpha command was absolute, pressing against her like a physical weight. "You stay here, in the most defensible position, with the strongest fighters. I'll take a strike team and..." The words cut off as Lyra's power flared in response to his command, the two forces colliding in the air between them. She felt something shift inside her, something vast and ancient awakening, and suddenly the entire pack house went silent. Every wolf within a mile radius had stopped what they were doing. She could feel them, their attention focused on her like 1,000 spotlights, their wolves pressing against their human consciousness in response to her call. "I said we go together," she repeated, and this time her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Not just alpha command, something deeper, older, more primal. Daemon staggered slightly, his face going pale. "Lyra, stop. You're..." Pain lanced through her skull like a lightning bolt, and she gasped, the power snapping back into her like a released rubber band. Around them, she could hear the pack shaking off her influence, confused voices rising as wolves tried to understand what had just happened. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pressing her hands to her temples as agony pulsed behind her eyes. "I didn't mean..." "The Silver Wolf bloodline," Johnson breathed, staring at her with something that might have been awe or terror. "The legends say they could command entire armies." "The legends also say it killed them," Daemon said harshly, moving to support Lyra as she swayed on her feet. "The power burned them out from the inside." Thomas was looking between them with growing alarm. "What do you mean, burned them out?" "Every silver wolf in recorded history died young," Johnson explained quietly. "The power was too much for their bodies to contain. Most didn't live past their 25th birthday." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. 25. She was 24. "That's not going to happen," Daemon said fiercely, his arms tightening around her. "I won't let it happen." But they were interrupted by another shout from the courtyard, this time from the Southern Watch. "Smoke on the horizon. They're burning the Miller farm." More shouts followed in rapid succession. "Eastern border under attack. Request immediate reinforcement at the river crossing. They're everywhere." Daemon cursed viciously. "They're forcing our hand. We can't defend all positions at once." "Then we don't," Lyra said, the tactical solution suddenly clear in her mind. "We split up." "Absolutely. Not split up to run," she interrupted, meeting his gaze steadily. "Split up to fight. You take the eastern and southern borders, you're the better strategic commander. I'll take a smaller team north to rescue Thomas. And walk directly into their trap. Yes. Her voice was steady now, resolved. But they're expecting a scared Omega trying to rescue her friend. They're not expecting the Silver Wolf. The plan that formed in her mind was desperate, dangerous, and probably suicidal. But it was also their only chance to save Thomas and protect the pack. The mate bond, Thomas said suddenly, understanding dawning in his eyes. You'll be separated. The strain will be worth it if it keeps everyone alive, Lyra finished. She was lying, and they all knew it. The mate bond was already pulling at her, demanding she stay close to Damon, demanding she prioritize their connection over everything else. Separating would be agony for both of them. But it was the only way. Damon was quiet for a long moment, his silver eyes searching her face. She could feel his internal struggle through the bond, his need to protect her warring with his respect for her strength, his tactical mind recognizing the wisdom of her plan even as his heart rejected it. If we do this, he said finally, you take Johnson and half the remaining fighters. You don't engage unless absolutely necessary. Get in, get Thomas, get out. Agreed. And if things go wrong, if you're overwhelmed, you run. No heroics, no last stands. You run, and you find me. She wanted to argue, wanted to point out that running wasn't an option when Thomas's life hung in the balance. But she could see the desperation in Damon's eyes, the way his hands shook slightly as he held her. I'll come back to you, she promised instead. It wasn't the same as agreeing to run, but it was the best she could offer. They had 20 minutes to prepare before the attacks intensified. 20 minutes to organize their forces, distribute weapons, and say what might be their final goodbyes. Lyra found herself in the armory, strapping on leather bracers that felt foreign against her skin. For 8 years, her only weapons had been invisibility and deception. Now she was preparing for open war. You don't have to do this. She turned to find Thomas behind her, his face grave with concern. Yes, I do. He's not even Pack, Thomas argued. Thomas Milliner is a good man, but he's not worth risking your life. Every life is worth risking my life for. She finished with the bracers and reached for a silver blade, one of the few weapons that could kill their kind quickly. That's what you never understood about my deception, Thomas. It was never about hiding from the world. It was about finding a world worth protecting. Before he could respond, the sound of howling erupted from the north, not the call of their own scouts, but something darker, more feral. The enemy was making their move. Time to go, Johnson called from the doorway. Strike teams, move out. The next few minutes blurred together in a haze of movement and desperate preparation. Damon's team headed southeast, where the bulk of the enemy forces were massing. Lyra's smaller group struck out north, moving fast and quiet through terrain she'd known since childhood. The separation hit her like a physical wound. Every step away from Damon felt like tearing part of herself away, and she could sense his agony echoing through the bond. Her wolf whimpered constantly, begging her to turn back, to return to their mate. But she pressed on. They found the enemy camp just as the sun reached its zenith, 12 wolves surrounding a small clearing where Thomas Milliner hung from a tree, his body broken and bloodied but his eyes still defiant. There, Johnson breathed, pointing to a figure standing apart from the others. That's Alpha Vincent, one of the coalition leaders. Lyra studied the scene, her newly awakened tactical instincts cataloging threats and opportunities. 12 enemies, 6 allies. Not impossible odds, but not good ones either. We go in fast and quiet, she whispered. Take out the sentries first, then. Her words were cut off by a scream that turned her blood to ice. Not from the clearing ahead, but from behind them, from the direction of the pack house. Thomas was looking south with horror. The smoke, there's too much smoke. She followed his gaze and felt her heart stop. Black clouds were rising from multiple points on the horizon, far more than could be explained by the small skirmishes they'd expected. It's a trick, she realized. The real attack isn't here. It's The howl that split the air was unmistakably Damon's, a sound of rage and desperation that spoke of overwhelming odds and impossible choices. "They've split their forces too," Johnson said grimly. "The bulk of them hit the pack house while we were drawn north." Through the mate bond, she could feel Damon's fury and fear, could sense him fighting desperately against odds that were steadily worsening. He needed her. Her pack needed her. But Thomas Milliner was dying, and if they left now, he would die for nothing. "New plan," she said, and her voice carried that terrible Silver Wolf authority again. "We save Thomas, and we do it fast. Lyra, we need to get back. We need to save him first." She could feel the power building inside her, responding to her desperation and rage. "I'm done watching good people die for me." She stepped into the clearing before anyone could stop her, her silver blade gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. "Let him go," she called out, and her voice rang across the clearing with inhuman authority. 12 enemy wolves turned toward her, their eyes widening as they recognized what she was. Alpha Vincent smiled, revealing teeth sharpened to points. "Well, well. The Silver Wolf comes to us willingly. I said let him go." This time, her power flared outward like a shockwave, and she felt it touch the minds of every wolf in the clearing. "Kneel." The command wasn't spoken aloud, but it slammed into them with the force of absolute authority. 3 of the weaker wolves actually dropped to their knees before they caught themselves, confusion and terror warring in their eyes. "Interesting," Vincent said, though his voice was strained. "But we've come prepared for your tricks, little Silver." He raised his hand, and Lyra saw the device strapped to his wrist, some kind of technological suppressor that glowed with unnatural light. "The Coalition has been studying your bloodline for 20 years, he continued. "We know your weaknesses." The device pulsed, and suddenly her power felt muffled, constrained. Not gone, but contained. "Now," Vincent said, his smile widening, "you're going to come with us quietly, or we're going to start removing pieces of your friend." That's when Johnson struck. The old Alpha moved faster than his age should have allowed, his claws ripping through the throat of the nearest enemy before they could react. The careful ambush dissolved into chaos as both sides shifted and began tearing at each other with desperate fury. But there were too many of them. Even with Johnson's experience and the element of surprise, they were outnumbered 2-1. Lyra watched Thomas, her Thomas, go down under 2 wolves, his agonized howl cutting through her heart like a blade. She saw Johnson stagger, blood pouring from claw marks across his chest. And she felt the suppressor's influence wavering as Vincent's attention turned to the battle. Enough. The command exploded out of her with the force of a nuclear blast, bypassing the technological suppressor through sheer overwhelming power. Every wolf in the clearing froze mid-motion as her will slammed into their minds like a sledgehammer. "Stop." 3 of the enemy wolves simply dropped where they stood, their hearts stopping under the crushing weight of her command. The others staggered, their wolves whimpering in submission to a power older and more primal than anything they'd ever encountered. Vincent himself fell to one knee, his suppressor device sparking and dying as her power overwhelmed its circuits. "You will release Thomas Milliner," her voice echoed directly into their minds. "You will leave this territory. You will never return." "No." Vincent fought against her command with desperate strength. "The Coalition needs you. The Coalition is nothing. You are nothing. I am the Silver Wolf, and I command you to die," she whispered, and felt the word carry lethal force. Vincent's eyes went wide, then rolled back as his heart simply stopped. He toppled forward, dead before he hit the ground. Around the clearing, the remaining enemy wolves fled in terror, their minds broken by contact with power they couldn't comprehend or resist. Only then did Lyra realize what she'd done. She'd killed them. Not in battle, not in self-defense, but with the raw force of her will. She'd reached into their minds and stopped their hearts as easily as turning off a light switch. The horror of it sent her to her knees, her stomach heaving as the full implications crashed over her. This was what the Silver Wolf bloodline could do. This was why the Coalition wanted her so desperately. She wasn't just a weapon. She was a god of death. Lyra. Johnson's voice was gentle as he helped cut Thomas Milliner down from the tree. We need to go. The pack house. Another howl split the air, Damon's voice, but weaker now, desperate. Through the bond, she could feel his strength failing. They were losing. There's something else, Thomas Milliner gasped as they loaded him onto Johnson's back. Something. Vincent said. About a traitor. Johnson went very still. What kind of traitor? Someone close to you. Someone who's been feeding them information for years. Each word was agony for him, but he forced them out. They said the betrayal goes back to the beginning. To when her parents died. That's impossible, Johnson said immediately. Everyone who knew about Lyra's arrival is dead or... He stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. Johnson? Lyra prompted, but the old alpha was staring into the distance with the expression of a man watching his world crumble. Marcus said her parents weren't just murdered, Thomas continued weakly. He said they were betrayed. By someone who knew them. Someone, family. No. Johnson's voice was barely a whisper. What aren't you telling me? Lyra demanded, her power stirring again in response to her growing fear. Johnson was quiet for a long moment, his shoulders sagging under a weight she couldn't understand. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with old grief and fresh horror. There was someone else who came with you that night, he said quietly. Someone I trusted completely. Someone who helped me protect your secret, who watched over you, who became one of my most valued advisors. Who? But even as she asked, she could see the answer in his eyes. Your father's brother. Your uncle. Jeremiah Silvermoon. The name hit her like a physical blow. Jeremiah, kind, gentle Jeremiah who'd taught her to read, who'd brought her books and told her stories of better worlds. Jeremiah who always seemed to know just a little too much about pack business, who always asked just a few too many questions about her recovery. Jeremiah, who'd been passed over for alpha leadership when his brother, her father, had been chosen instead. He's been with the coalition from the beginning, she realized, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. He betrayed his own brother. He sold out my parents. And he's been watching me for 8 years, waiting for my powers to manifest. So he could deliver you personally, Johnson confirmed, his voice hollow with betrayal. A new howl echoed across the forest, not Damon's voice this time, but something closer, more familiar. Jeremiah's call, summoning the pack to rally at the main house. Where he would be waiting with whatever forces he'd managed to preserve from the attack. Where he would finally claim his prize. We have to warn Damon, Lyra said, but even as she spoke, she could feel the mate bond growing weaker, more distant. Whatever was happening at the pack house, her mate was running out of time. And the man she'd trusted like a father was about to deliver her directly into the coalition's hands. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. The silver moon rose like a beacon of destiny above Shadow Moon territory, its ethereal light painting the battlefield in shades of prophecy and doom. Lyra stood on the pack house roof, her silver hair gleaming like spun moonlight as she surveyed the approaching army. 60 wolves had become 120. The coalition had called in every favor, activated every alliance, gathered every mercenary pack willing to die for a chance at claiming the silver wolf. They're beautiful, aren't they? She didn't turn at the sound of Jeremiah's voice. She'd been expecting him, had felt his presence approaching through her newly awakened senses. Her uncle stood 20 feet behind her, close enough to strike but far enough to retreat if needed. The coalition forces, he clarified, mistaking her silence for confusion. So many strong wolves, united in purpose. This could have been avoided, you know. If your father had simply seen reason. Like you did? Her voice carried none of the warmth she'd once held for the man who'd read her bedtime stories and taught her to identify healing herbs. I saw opportunity. Jeremiah moved closer, and she could feel his wolf pressing against his human form, eager for the hunt. Your father saw only sentiment. He refused to use your mother's power for anything meaningful. Wasted it on healing sick pups and mending broken bones when she could have conquered nations. So you killed them. I liberated her potential. There was no remorse in his voice, only cold calculation. Your mother was weak, corrupted by love. She would have died young anyway, all silver wolves do. At least this way, her bloodline serves a greater purpose. The casual dismissal of her parents' murder sent fury racing through Lyra's veins, and the silver moon responded to her rage. Power thrummed beneath her skin like liquid lightning, begging to be released. Control, she reminded herself. Power without control is just destruction. Where's Daemon? She asked instead, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. Fighting for his life on the southern border, along with half your precious pack family. Jeremiah's smile was cold and satisfied. Did you really think I'd give you the chance to coordinate your defenses? The Alpha King is formidable, but even he can't be in 3 places at once. Through the mate bond, she could feel Daemon's exhaustion and growing desperation. He was alive but barely holding his position, and every moment she spent talking to her uncle was another moment closer to losing him forever. What do you want? She asked, though she already knew the answer. You. Alive, unharmed, and cooperative. Jeremiah gestured toward the army surrounding the pack house. Surrender yourself, and I'll call off the attack. Your pack can live out their natural lives in whatever peace they can manage. And if I refuse? Then I'll burn this place to the ground and sift through the ashes for your bones. His eyes glowed with an inner light that had nothing to do with his wolf. The silver moon peaks in less than an hour, Lyra. Your powers will reach their zenith, but they'll also burn through your life force like acid. Fight me tonight, and even if you win, you'll die before dawn. The threat hung in the air between them, as real and deadly as the army below. But as Lyra looked out over the approaching forces, she realized something that made her smile. You made a mistake, Uncle. Did I? You told them I was just a weapon. A tool to be used and controlled. She turned to face him fully, and in the silver moon's light, her eyes blazed with power that made him take an involuntary step backward. But I'm not just the silver wolf bloodline. I'm not just Daemon's mate. The power inside her surged, responding to her acceptance, her determination, her absolute refusal to be anyone's victim ever again. I'm the Silver Queen. And this is my pack. She threw back her head and howled, not the call of a frightened Omega or even a powerful Alpha, but something older and more primal. The voice of the Silver Wolves, thought extinct for generations, rising once more to defend what was theirs. The sound rolled across the battlefield like thunder, and every wolf within miles felt it in their bones. In the forest to the south, she felt Daemon's answering call, fierce with pride and desperate love. Around the pack house, she felt her family responding, Johnson, Thomas, and dozens of others who'd chosen to stand with her rather than flee. But she also felt something else. From the east, howls rose in response to her call, not enemies, but allies. The neighboring packs, drawn by the silver moon and her impossible voice. Jeremiah's confident smile faltered. That's not possible. The River Moon and Stormcrest packs swore neutrality. They swore neutrality to a conflict between alphas, Lyra corrected. But I'm not asking them to fight for territory or politics. I'm asking them to stand against the kind of monsters who would murder families and sell children. Below them, the approaching army hesitated as dozens of new wolves poured into the territory from the east. Not enough to match the coalition's numbers, but enough to turn a massacre into a real battle. It doesn't matter, Jeremiah snarled, his composure finally cracking. Numbers won't save you when your power burns you alive. The silver moon will make me stronger than you can imagine. Lyra stepped closer, and with each step, her power grew more focused, more controlled. I spent 8 years learning to hide, Uncle. 8 years perfecting the art of survival through deception. Did you really think I hadn't learned anything about controlling power I didn't want others to see? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Jeremiah's face. You're bluffing. No silver wolf has ever controlled the Moonrise power. It's killed every one of them. Every one of them was alone. Lyra smiled, and it was sharp as a blade. I have something they never did. Through the mate bond, she felt Daemon approaching, his presence like a beacon drawing her scattered pieces together. The power that had been threatening to consume her suddenly found its anchor, its balance, its perfect counterpoint. I'm here, his voice whispered through their connection. Always. A mate bond, she continued aloud, watching realization dawn in her uncle's eyes. An alpha strong enough to ground me, to channel the power instead of being destroyed by it. You studied the Silver Wolf bloodline for 20 years, but you never understood its greatest strength. Which is? We were never meant to fight alone. Daemon appeared at the roof's edge, hauling himself up with predatory grace despite the exhaustion she could feel radiating from him. Blood streaked his face and arms, testament to the battle he'd just fought, but his silver eyes burned with unwavering determination. Sorry I'm late, he said, moving to stand beside her. Had to finish explaining to a few coalition alphas why threatening my mate was a bad idea. The moment he touched her, the Silver Moon's power settled into something sustainable, something she could wield without burning herself alive. Through their bond, she felt his strength feeding hers, his tactical brilliance sharpening her instincts, his absolute faith giving her the confidence to embrace what she was. Together, she whispered, and he nodded. Together. The battle that followed would be remembered in pack legends for generations. Lyra fought like vengeance given form, her silver wolf larger and faster than physics should allow. But more importantly, she fought smart, using her command voice to coordinate the defense, to turn enemy wolves against each other, to create chaos in their ranks while protecting her own. Daemon moved like death incarnate, his tactical mind and centuries of experience turning the rooftop into a fortress no enemy could breach. Together, they were unstoppable, the Silver Queen and the Alpha King, united in purpose and power. But it was when Jeremiah shifted and came for her directly that the real test began. Her uncle's wolf was massive, scarred from decades of battles and politics. But more than that, it was clever. He'd had 20 years to study Silver Wolf weaknesses, to plan for this exact confrontation. They clashed in the center of the roof, their combined weight cracking the ancient timbers. He was larger, stronger, more experienced. But Lyra had something he'd never understood. She fought not for power or conquest, but for the people she loved. Show him what the Silver Wolves were truly meant to be, Sarah whispered, and Lyra let her wolf surge forward with the full power of the Silver Moon behind her. The fight was brutal and swift. When it ended, Jeremiah lay pinned beneath her, his throat exposed, his defeat absolute. Do it, he gasped, blood frothing from his muzzle. Kill me. Prove you're the monster I always said you were. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming. Justice demanded his death. Vengeance screamed for his blood. Every instinct she possessed told her to end the threat he represented permanently. Instead, she stepped back. No, she said, her voice carrying to every wolf on the battlefield. I won't become what you wanted me to be. I won't be the weapon you tried to forge. Around them, the fighting gradually ceased as both sides realized the central battle was over. Coalition wolves, seeing their architect defeated and spared, began to surrender or flee. Her allies moved to secure the territory and tend to the wounded. You think mercy makes you strong? Jeremiah snarled, struggling to his feet. You think? I think mercy makes me free, Lyra interrupted. Free from the cycle of violence that killed my parents. Free from the fear that's defined my entire life. Free to choose who I want to be instead of letting others choose for me. She looked around at the assembled wolves, her pack family, Daemon's allies, even some of the former enemies who'd thrown down their weapons in surrender. I am Lyra Silvermoon, she announced, her voice ringing across the battlefield. Daughter of Marcus and Elena Silvermoon. Mate to Alpha King Daemon Nightshade. And I claim my birthright not through conquest or intimidation, but through choice. She turned to Damon, who was watching her with something that might have been awe. "If you'll have me," she added quietly, "just for him." His answer was to drop to one knee, his head bowed in a gesture that shocked every wolf present. The Alpha King, the most powerful werewolf alive, submitting to her judgment. "I would be honored," he said formally, "to call you my mate, my equal, and my queen." The silver moon reached its zenith as she placed her hand on his head, accepting his submission and offering her own in return. The mate bond flared between them, no longer the desperate pull of need but the steady strength of perfect partnership. When they rose together, it was as something new, not conqueror and conquered, not even just mates, but true partners in every sense of the word. The pack's howls of acceptance rose to meet the silver moon, and for the first time in 8 years, Lyra used her real voice without fear or hesitation. She was no longer the silent Omega, hiding in shadows and pretending to be broken. She was the Silver Queen, and she would never be silent again. Epilogue: New Voices. 3 months later. Lyra stood in the rebuilt Great Hall of Shadowmoon Pack, reading the message that had arrived that morning. The paper trembled slightly in her hands, not from fear but from excitement. "What is it?" Damon asked, looking up from the territorial agreements he'd been reviewing. The Alpha King still handled the politics of their expanded alliance, but now he did it with her counsel and support. "A letter," she said, her voice steady and strong. "From Scotland. There are rumors." She paused, hardly daring to believe what she was reading. "Rumors of what?" Thomas prompted. Her childhood friend had recovered fully from his ordeal and now served as beta to both packs, coordinating between Damon's forces and the Shadowmoon wolves. "Another silver wolf bloodline," she finished, her eyes bright with possibility. "A young woman, barely 18, hiding in the Highlands. She's in danger, and she's completely alone." Damon moved to read over her shoulder, his arm automatically coming around her waist. The gesture was possessive but not controlling, the touch of a partner, not a master. "The Highland packs are notoriously territorial," he said thoughtfully. "If there's a silver wolf there, and if the wrong people find out, she'll end up like my parents," Lyra finished grimly. "Or like I almost did." She looked around the great hall, at the pack members who'd become her family, at the man who'd become her anchor and her equal. 8 years of hiding had taught her the value of truth. 3 months of freedom had taught her the power of choice. "We have to help her," she said, and it wasn't a request. Damon smiled, not the cold expression he'd worn as the solitary Alpha King, but the warm, proud look he reserved for his mate and queen. "Then we help her," he agreed. "The Silver Queen's first royal decree?" Lyra looked out the window at the territory they'd fought to protect, at the alliance they'd built through choice rather than conquest. Her voice had been silent for 8 years, but it would never be silent again. "No silver wolf stands alone," she said, her words carrying the weight of law and the promise of salvation. "Not while I draw breath." The message from Scotland was just the beginning. Across the ocean, a frightened young woman was learning to hide her voice, to make herself small and invisible. But help was coming. The Silver Queen had found her voice, and she would use it to ensure that no one else ever had to lose theirs. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.